During the 5 months of Turner's confinement in a wooden cage, his reaction to Shaman Rodney's visits was always the same, a wide grin. Sometimes, he would even wave his hands as Shaman Rodney burned incense. However, if he caught sight of Regan leaning on the center post, Turner would complain. Shaman Rodney frequently reminded Regan to treat his brother with respect. The purpose of locking Turner in the wooden cage was not to prevent him from bothering others, but rather to keep him under control and prevent him from wandering aimlessly. Whenever I missed Turner, I would take a stroll by the river, all the while wearing a grin on my face. The women who were washing clothes would often run away in fear when they saw Turner, even though he wasn't intentionally teasing anyone. Turner would jump up and down with excitement as he watched the girls flee. If Regan ever spotted his brother wandering around the village, he would confront him and forcefully bring him back home. On some occasions, their mother would cry upon seeing Turner's bleeding knees from being dragged by his brother. Turner endured this torment for about 5 months in the wooden cage, and it would have been even worse if Shaman Rodney hadn't intervened. Regan was the one who inflicted suffering upon Turner, but no one could prevent him from walking around with a grin on his face and a wooden stick in his hand, as his mind was no longer like that of an ordinary person. It had been some time since Turner lost his sanity, and nobody knew why. However, as long as their mother could remember, Turner had always been lost in his own thoughts. He no longer joined his friends on hunting trips in the forest, and he even refused to eat or speak to anyone. Gradually, his behavior started to change. He would have conversations with himself, wearing a big smile and bursting into uncontrollable laughter. Shaman Rodney, who called himself a shaman, believed that Turner was being influenced by forest spirits. After hearing their mother's account of Regan mistreating Turner, Shaman Rodney reminded Regan to be kind to his brother. He explained that Turner was troubled and difficult to help, so they needed to be patient and take care of him. Regan agreed, knowing that he never intended to mistreat Turner. However, when reasoning with Turner didn't work, Regan had no choice but to persist. Sometimes Turner would purposely make a mess while eating or even urinate on his plate, unless Regan challenged him and made him obey. Shaman Rodney acknowledged that taking care of someone like Turner was challenging, but they needed to remain patient because no one else would care for him. Their mother was once again left speechless, especially since Turner had become sick. Regan, who was now married, had taken Turner into his own home. Turner had always been responsible for his own livelihood, whether it was collecting woods or setting traps for moths. He was a hard-working young man with a strong physique, curly hair, and a dark complexion. In their village, he was considered quite attractive and would often playfully tease the girls during village celebrations. Ever since falling ill, Turner has undergone a complete transformation. Although his body remains plump, it is now adorned with untidy stains that he fails to manage. The air around him carries a musty odor, as he rarely takes the time to shower. Only on rare occasions can his mother convince him to cleanse himself, and in those moments, she can't help but express her emotional distress at her son's situation. Turner simply grins at the sight of his weeping mother. Sometimes, he relieves an itch on his back by rubbing it against the wall, or he aimlessly paces within a wooden enclosure that he himself constructed. No matter how much his mother laments in front of him, Turner remains unresponsive. His mother, holding back her own sorrow, reminds him that his height is predetermined by fate. Turner's indifference persists, unaffected by his mother's moans and sobs. Whether Turner is influenced by the spirits of the forest animals or not, his mother pays little attention, as she knows he has a deep affinity for hunting. However, his hunting endeavors have not come without consequences. After successfully trapping a deer, Turner experienced a bleeding earache while struggling to subdue the animal alongside his friends. Upon returning from the forest, all 8 individuals who had ventured out fell ill. Some developed fevers and swollen necks due to mumps. Others suffered from boils on their calves, causing prolonged discomfort. A few experienced restless nights, plagued by nightmares of towering figures. Additionally, one person endured a month-long bout of eye pain, rendering their vision a hazy red. Although it should be referred to as hemorrhoids, the sensation in Turner's anus resembles that of a freshly healed wound. Turner's friends have all recovered from their injuries and no longer wish to hunt forest animals. One of his friends, who had slaughtered a deer, experienced a sharp pain in his neck as if it had been sliced with a knife and developed mumps. Normally, mumps would heal within 2 to 3 days, but his friend had been suffering for over a month. Shaman Rodney had to use black cloth and betel nuts to numb the pain. Another friend had a boil on his calf which swelled to the size of a betel nut. Shaman Rodney treated him with barking, and after almost a month of suffering, the boil finally erupted, releasing pus mixed with thick blood. Yet another friend, who had simply sat on the body of a fallen deer, returned home with a fever and experienced hallucinations, fearing that someone was trying to strangle him. Shaman Rodney used a black cloth and water from 7 river basins, along with 7 colored flowers, to numb his symptoms. Turner himself had squeezed the base of the deer's ears with his knees, causing them to bleed. He felt a strange sensation like a cockroach crawling, and when he stuffed cotton into the ears, it began to bleed. Despite Shaman Rodney's warnings, Turner remained stubborn and determined to go to the forest alone, setting traps in his usual spots. Not long after, he developed a habit of sitting alone, lost in his thoughts, always careful not to be discovered. Eventually, things took a turn, and he transformed into what he is now. He roamed aimlessly throughout the village, carrying a wooden stick. Whenever he stumbled upon a tree, he would pause and lean against it, seeking solace from his weariness. At times, he would engage in conversations with himself, with no one but the grains of sand as his audience. If he ever crossed paths with Regan, fear would grip him and he would sprint away. His brother would intervene, urging him to return home, but Turner refused. He would sprint off to wherever his heart desired, leaving Regan with no choice but to forcefully drag him back home. However, once locked inside a wooden cage, Regan no longer needed to keep a watchful eye on his younger brother as he wandered through the village. He would only appear when it was time for lunch or dinner. Who knows what Turner would do, perhaps urinating on the food and mixing it together before consuming it. His mother, unable to cope with the situation, was no longer capable of taking care of him. The sight of her son's complete transformation from a handsome young man to a disheveled figure, with his clothes in disarray, brought tears to her eyes. Turner's erratic behavior took a toll on him, and he suddenly passed away. When his mother discovered him, Turner was lying down with his body leaning against a wooden basket. His mouth was bleeding, and his eyes were wide open. It seemed as though Turner's death had lifted the burden off his mother's shoulders, as she no longer had to care for her son who had lost his sanity. Shaman Rodney could only shake his head in sorrow, as he was unable to save the young man. "This is the consequence of defying the forest's rules," complained Shaman Rodney when Turner's body was laid to rest. "He was truly stubborn," Regan explained. "He was warned not to venture into the forest, but he chose to ignore it. Look at his friends. They all listened to Shaman Rodney's advice and remained safe," Regan said, expressing regret over his brother's reckless behavior. Shaman Rodney's thoughts on the matter were unclear. When asked about the unfortunate event that had befallen his best friend, Turner, he hesitated before responding. "I'm not sure," he said, shaking his head. "I don't know what kind of animal spirits are involved, but usually they're as tough as a chicken or a deer." Just as he was about to continue, his friend interrupted, suggesting that it could have been a jungle fowl. His friend then reminded him of Turner's story before he fell ill. Turner had set a trap in a spacious area and managed to catch a jungle fowl. However, when he went to retrieve the snare, a black snake crossed his path, causing him to flinch. Turner watched in surprise as the snake quickly disappeared into the betel nut bush. He had to let the snake go and then chased after his snare, only to find an old man dressed in black standing in front of him. The old man had swallowed the chicken that was caught in the snare. Confused, Turner explained that he was trying to catch a jungle fowl, not a country chicken. The old man kindly explained that country chickens often gather in that area, indicating that jungle fowls were likely nearby. Turner was taken aback by the old man's friendly demeanor and understanding, despite the mishap with the chicken. As he gathered the fragments of stone he had thrown towards the bush, he noticed something peculiar, a hidden hut. Turner's heart burned with anger, realizing he had been deceived by the old man he trusted. He had been convinced that there were no jungle fowls, only to discover that the old man he had encountered the day before had played him for a fool. Unable to contain his frustration, he confided in his friend, recounting the entire incident. From that moment on, Turner couldn't shake off the haunting memory of that encounter, harboring a deep grudge against the old man who had pretended to be friendly and kind, only to betray him. "Why didn't you inform Shaman Rodney when Turner fell ill?" one friend asked, clearly annoyed by the other's secretive behavior. "Now that he's gone, there's no point in mentioning the details that are already in the past," Regan replied dismissively. Turner had been laid to rest, but his absence left his mother devastated, as he was her only child lived with her and her sole companion. Without Turner, she felt a profound sense of loneliness. Although she could live with Regan, burdening him with the responsibility of caring for his mother was pointless. The night after Turner's burial, his mother heard eerie whispers emanating from his grave, as if he were trapped in a wooden cage, moaning in agony. She confided in Regan, as her house was situated dangerously close to the cemetery, allowing her to clearly hear the haunting voices. On the second evening, Regan and Turner's friend visited the Turner grave after Shaman Rodney instructed them to recite holy verses. The trio took turns reading the verses from 6 in the evening until sunset. As they continued, they heard more groans coming from Turner's grave, pleading for assistance. However, as the night progressed, the groans ceased, prompting them to head home as instructed by Shaman Rodney to return the following night for another round of recitations. Upon returning to Regan's house, they discovered his wife unconscious, adding to the already troubling situation. Regan, feeling overwhelmed by the recent events, expressed his frustration at the unfortunate turn of events. Shaman Rodney noticed a strange green bubble emerging from the woman's mouth, leaving everyone puzzled and concerned. Despite the advice to remain patient from Shaman Rodney, Regan's mother, and wife's relatives, the weight of the situation proved to be too much for him to bear. The haunting memory of his brother's grave and the sudden illness of his wife weighed heavily on Regan's heart, making it difficult for him to find solace in patience. "Has my wife been cursed by an animal?" Regan's frustration was evident as he struggled to contain his anger. Turner, a key figure in the story, was known for sending deer meat or jungle fowl to Regan's family, leading to speculation that those who consumed the meat might also fall victim to the curse. Regan's father-in-law, equally distraught over his daughter's sudden illness, tried to console him, urging him to be patient. The rumors suggested that Regan's attempt to help his brother might have triggered the curse, affecting his wife as well. Desperate for a solution, Regan turned to holy verses, reading them aloud at Turner's grave. Miraculously, his wife regained consciousness, unaware of what had transpired. However, her recovery was short-lived. For an entire week she lay unconscious, her mouth oozing green saliva like moss, until she finally succumbed to death. Strangely, after his wife's passing, the haunting moans that echoed every evening from Turner's grave ceased. Shaman Rodney, deep in thought, finally shared the rest of the story with Turner's friend. Reluctantly, he revealed that there was more to the curse than met the eye. "Did you know that Turner's grave emits a sound?" Turner's friend inquired. Shaman Rodney nodded solemnly, his face filled with emotion. He called out to his brother, begging for help. He claimed he couldn't bear the heat, he confessed, but how could he lose his mind like that? Turner's friend pressed for further details. "That's a difficult question to answer," Shaman Rodney replied cryptically. "This has been going on for 20 years, and it's hard to say. It seemed as though he was intentionally withholding information, perhaps to protect the memory of the event." However, Turner's friend's curiosity persisted, and he reluctantly continued. "Actually, Regan witnessed a man jumping out of his room window when he returned from work," Shaman Rodney revealed. But this account was not entirely reliable, as Regan had only heard the sound of someone landing and fleeing. When he questioned his wife, she denied seeing anyone enter the house. Regan, a resilient individual, dedicated himself to learning about religion and would never dare to accuse his wife of infidelity. However, he felt compelled to confide in Shaman Rodney. Despite Regan's doubts, Shaman Rodney, being a close friend of Regan's father, assured him that his wife was innocent and suggested that Regan perform a prayer for 44 consecutive nights to confirm this. Trusting Shaman Rodney's judgment, Regan followed his advice. After completing the 44 nights of prayer, Regan discovered that his wife had remained unchanged. He accepted Shaman Rodney's opinion and realized that his jealousy had caused him to misinterpret a man jumping from a window. With a calm heart, Regan acknowledged his wife's faithfulness and thanked God. His wife, relieved that her husband no longer suspected her, also felt immense happiness. Unfortunately, Regan's misfortune continued when his younger brother Turner fell victim to a curse from a forest animal. Turner lost his senses after encountering an old man while trapping jungle fowls. Regan made every effort to heal his brother, but tragically, Turner died under horrifying circumstances. Shaman Rodney, reflecting on events from 20 years ago, lamented the consequences of the prayer reading. He revealed that Turner had indeed jumped from his brother's house, while Regan's wife had been involved in an affair with her own brother-in-law. However, Shaman Rodney chose to keep this secret from Regan, using the curse of forest animals as an excuse to hide the truth. Turner himself confessed his regret to Shaman Rodney, but he couldn't bring himself to interrupt Regan's ongoing prayers, which had almost reached the 44th night.